What's up my friends and welcome back to the channel, and on today's video we are doing a review and a comparison between TYR's super shoe, the TYR Valkyrie Elite Carbon, and its training partner, the TYR Valkyrie Speedworks. Let's get into it. Okay, let's get started with those disclosures. This video is in collaboration with my friends over at Roadrunner Sports, and both the Valkyrie Elite Carbon and the Valkyrie Speedworks were sent to me for the purpose of review. However, no one at Roadrunner Sports has told me what to say, they don't have any editorial privileges, and all the thoughts and opinions are my own. With that said, you can pick up a pair of the TYR Valkyrie Elite Carbon for $250 and the TYR Valkyrie Speedworks for $170, both from Roadrunner Sports. And of course, I'll place links in the show notes below in case you want to pick up either or both for these for yourself. And right off the bat, these two shoes do complement each other. So let's get started with some specs on the TYR Valkyrie Elite Carbon. We have 39.5 in the heel, 33.5 in the forefoot for a 6mm drop. TYR says that in a US men's size 9, the Valkyrie Elite Carbon will tip the scale at 7.8 ounces or 221 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 13, it tips the scale at 9.7 ounces or 275 grams. Now here's the thing. The Valkyrie Speedworks is very similar to the Valkyrie Elite Carbon. We also have 39.5 in the heel, 33.5 in the forefoot for a 6mm drop. And with the Speedworks, TYR is reporting a US men's size 9 will tip the scale at 8.1 ounces or 230 grams. And in my size, a US men's size 13, the Speedworks tips the scale at 10.1 ounces or 286 grams. So I did say they are similar, and they are very similar. We are using the same foam, the same geometry. Ultimately, TYR has changed the upper between the Valkyrie Elite Carbon and the Speedworks, and the Elite Carbon has a carbon fiber plate, like the name suggests, and the Speedworks has a nylon plate. Now I want you to think of ththese two as partners, in the same way that the Saucony Endorphin Pro 4 and the Endorphin Speed 4 are partners. But get this, in the sample size, so US men's size 9, the Speedworks weighs 3 grams less than the Endorphin Speed 4, and in my size, the Speedworks weighs 8 grams less than the Endorphin Speed 4. Now it's not quite as good for the Valkyrie Carbon Elite, or Elite Carbon. But in the sample size, US men's size 9, the Valkyrie Elite weighs 9 grams more than the Endorphin Pro 4, and in my size, the Endorphin Pro 4 weighs 15 grams more. So it's not a lot, and there are other differences which I'll get into in just a second. So let's go back to the Elite Carbon, and let's start at the top and work our way down. And if I hold this up, you can see that for a race day shoe, we have quite a bit of padding coming around this heel collar. It's a well-padded shoe, and the heel counter is semi-rigid, so it does give me a good grip on the back of my heel. I didn't experience any heel slip. As far as overlays go, TYR has chosen to have this overlay coming right around the toe box, and that's going to give your toes a little protection and keep that upper off your foot. Speaking of uppers, TYR is using their Hyperweave upper on the Valkyrie Elite Carbon, and it is very light, it's very breathable. It's a little rough to the touch, almost like a burlap sack, but when you're running in it, it's like a screen door. The shoe is so breathable. And we do have some additional overlays coming around the heel collar, along the eyelet chain, just to strengthen that up a bit. And I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera. Yes, you can see it. We've got these internal bands that we can get a good look at just because the Hyperweave upper is so thin. But these midfoot bands really contribute to a great midfoot lockdown. We have serrated laces, which is really the only option on a race day shoe, because ultimately they're the only laces that I would pretty much guarantee to not come untied. We have 2 lace loops right on the front, and the tongue is gusseted on both sides. Tongue isn't going anywhere. Now there isn't a lot of padding on the tongue, but I didn't experience any lace bite, no hot spots on the top of my foot. All in all, a great lockdown. Now let's come over to the Speedworks. Now where the Elite Carbon had a Hyperweave upper, TYR is using their Alphaweave upper in the Speedworks. And I would say that this is possibly where that slight increase in weight is, except it doesn't seem like it because the Alphaweave upper is also very breathable. Again, it's just like a screen door. It's a lot softer than the Hyperweave on the Elite Carbon, and I would say just as breathable. A very similar design with the overlays. We've got them coming around the toe box, again coming around the heel. The heel counter is quite a bit more rigid, and the padding around the heel collar is just slightly more on the Speedworks than it is on the Elite Carbon. In fact, if I hold that up, I bet it's difficult for you to see the difference. And I didn't actually notice the difference between the padding around the heel collar. Both gave me a very comfortable step-in feel. We've got the overlays coming along the eyelet chain, but on the Speedworks we don't have that same kind of midfoot cage that comes down. With the Speedworks we have a single lace loop in the middle, and then the tongue is fully gusseted. And just the same with the Elite Carbon, I didn't experience any tongue migration and no lace bite. That's probably because the tongue is just slightly thicker on the Speedworks than it is on the Valkyrie Carbon, but it doesn't really matter because they both had no lace bite, and I did get a good lockdown in both. The laces on the Speedworks are not locking laces, they're just, I don't know, regular laces. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. In fact, they never came untied, so I've got nothing to complain. So now it's time to come down to the midsole. The midsole foam, TYR is using their Launch PX in both shoes. And Launch PX is a supercritical Pebax foam, and you're getting that top of the line Pebax foam, super responsive in both of these shoes. Now it is a beaded Pebax foam, and basically all that means is that you can see the little beads that make up the foam, but what it really means for me is that dirt always seems to get trapped within the little beads, so it never looks as fresh as I want it to. And we can see my pair of Valkyrie Elite Carbon is actually quite dirty, and that's because I did take it off-road onto some quite muddy trails. And I know I shouldn't have, it was a total oversight, and I'll be totally honest, they did not perform well on the trails, but again, that's my own fault. This is a road racing super shoe, it is not made to run on the trails, and I paid for it by never being able to get my pair clean again. The Speedworks, on the other hand, have not been run on trails, and they're looking a lot better. They're still looking fresh. And now that I've said fresh, I think this is a point to just bring up that TYR is really on point with their design. I love both these shoes. I think they have a fresh aesthetic, and I'm loving the white on white colorway. Of course, they do come in other colorways. If you wanted it in black, you could get it, but the white does look good. Okay, so we do have the same Launch PX beaded supercritical Pebax midsole on the Elite Carbon. If we look in the little cutout in the bottom, we have that carbon plate. And on the Speedworks, we have the nylon plate. And just looking at the shoes, it's very difficult to tell them apart, but let me do a quick flexibility test. The Speedworks, because of the nylon plate, is a lot less rigid, and I'm able to bend it up quite well. The Elite Carbon, on the other hand, is not so flexible. In fact, that carbon plate is very difficult to bend. Like, I'm putting a lot of effort in here, and ultimately that is reflected in the ride. But first, let's come down to the outsole. We can see in both these shoes, we have a great coverage of outsole rubber, especially up on the forefoot. And when we're running fast, I think we're going to be tending to strike on the forefoot just a little more, and we've got the rubber in the key places on the heel. Just looking at the outsole rubber, it looks like I have a little more wear on my Speedworks than I do on the Elite Carbon, but I think that is probably a product of the way I'm running in the Speedworks versus the way I'm running in the Elite Carbon. I ran a lot more slow miles in the Speedworks, and I kind of kept my Elite Carbon for those faster days. I mean, it is a race day shoe. It's made to go fast. Okay, one thing I do just want to show you is this exploded version of the Elite Carbon, and you can see here that the carbon fiber plate sits very low in the shoe. It comes very low down in the forefoot, and it doesn't curve up much when it gets to the heel. That same plate shape is in the Speedworks, but what that means, at least in my experience, is that the TYR Valkyrie Elite Carbon and Speedworks might favor a midfoot to forefoot runner better than a heel striker. And I only say that because I've got a lot of experience running in carbon plated shoes, and for me, someone who does heel strike, I find that when that plate is just a little higher in the heel, it allows me to roll through my gait cycle and then off. Whereas when the plate is just slightly flatter, as it is in the Elite Carbon, it limits the rolling motion from the heel to the toe, and rather when you land midfoot to forefoot, does kind of bounce and send you off. And there is definitely some bounce in this shoe. We can tell by the stiffness of this plate. But the Launch PX supercritical Pebax foam feels exactly as you would expect a supercritical Pebax foam to feel. It's very light and very responsive, and even when it has the nylon plate, you really feel that the shoe wants to get up and go. Okay, so now let's talk about ride. And TYR has really done something special with both of these shoes. They've really made a top tier tempo daily trainer and a top tier race day shoe. I mean, the Valkyrie Elite Carbon can compete with most other carbon plated shoes out there. It is surprisingly good. And the difference between the Speedworks and the Elite Carbon is that the Elite Carbon just feels slightly more aggressive. And as we would expect, it tends to come alive when you pick up the pace. Now, if I hold it up, we can see this geometry. It's a fairly late rocker. So when you start picking up the pace and you start landing a little forward, you can really feel the shoe kind of moving you off and moving you forward. Now, the same thing is technically true with the Speedworks, but because it wasn't as aggressive as the Elite Carbon, I found it a little more well-rounded. And for my normal training runs, and this is going to come to a surprise to no one because it's exactly as TYR intended and designed, the Valkyrie Speedworks feels a lot better at slower paces. And that's a huge benefit, because not only does it feel good at slower paces, because we've got that nylon plate, because we've got this high-end Pebax foam, it also picks up the pace remarkably well. And for $170, to me at least, the Speedworks represents an even better value than the Elite Carbon. Now that's not technically fair, because it's always going to be a better value if you can use it for more runs, right? If you're buying the Elite Carbon, you're probably going to be saving this for race day. And there is no doubt in my mind that the Elite Carbon is a faster shoe than the Speedworks. But if you didn't have a budget to buy a $250 race day shoe, you would not go wrong with the Speedworks. And I think it would treat you right. Oh, something I can't believe I left out until now is that TYR is including an anatomical shaped toe box. And this is a bigger deal than you think, because a lot of shoes, a lot of fast shoes are very narrow. So perhaps if you have wider feet, Speedworks or the Elite Carbon going to be worth taking a look at. Now, I have fairly narrow feet, and yet I still found the Speedworks and the Elite Carbon to be extremely comfortable. And I would say more comfortable than a lot of my other narrow race day shoes. Oh, I should also mention that both of these shoes have a molded sock liner for comfort and support. However, you cannot remove them. So if you usually remove the insole that comes with your shoes, just know you won't be able to do that with these. So overall, my impression of these shoes is very good. I think TYR has really knocked it out of the park. However, they're not perfect. And there is one thing that came to my attention comparison that I have to tell you about, because if you're running in these, it will make a difference. And the only negative that I have about both these shoes is the heel cup, and that it sits quite low. Your foot goes quite low into the shoe, and normally that wouldn't make any difference. But this heel comes up quite high, and because you're sitting so low in the shoe, I did experience a little heel rub when I was wearing low socks. Now that problem totally went away when I wore quarter length or crew socks, but if I tried to run in both the Speedworks and the Elite Carbon in no-show socks, the no-show was a no-go. I did start to notice that rubbing at the back. So keep that in mind if you decide to pick up either the Speedworks or the Elite Carbon. So now I want to hear from you. Have you run in the Valkyrie Elite Carbon or the Valkyrie Speedworks? If you have, drop a comment and let me know. And if you haven't, are you thinking about picking up either one? Again, I'll place links to both of these shoes from my friends over at Roadrunner Sports. But for now, it's Matt B. This has been my review and comparison of the TYR Valkyrie Speedworks and the TYR Valkyrie Elite Carbon. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.